Hello. Welcome in. I'm sitting here actually just getting ready to read a little bit of the Silmarillion. We actually talked about this a couple visits ago. But there are really at least two things that I recommend reading before reading Lord of the Rings, before starting with the long expected party. And they're from the Silmarillion. And I think you should read them because it gives context for a lot of the I'm trying to think of the right thing, the philosophical undertones for the Lord of the Rings, for the conflict. The first one being the voyage of Randil and his kind of starting the avalanche that is the War of Wrath and the ultimate imprisonment of Morgoth. And of course that plays into Randil having the Silmaril, and eventually he's placed in the heavens. He essentially becomes a star. And the star is the light of the Silmaril, which we know that Frodo gets some of that light in a phial from Galadriel, and it ends up really saving him and Sam actually in some very dark places. The second being the rise and fall of Numenor. So if you don't understand the fall specifically of Numenor and the waning of the Numenorean kings and that sort of thing, once they get to Middle-earth, it's hard to understand Aragorn, because that's where he's coming from. He's coming from this long line of essentially exiled kings that are just kind of waiting for the right time to take back their throne. Anyway, so those are really kind of the two I recommend reading. If you read the whole Silmarillion, that certainly wouldn't hurt, but there are some standalone stories in the Silmarillion that are perhaps referenced in the Lord of the Rings, but perhaps don't bear on the story itself or anything like that. Thinking of like the Children of Hurin, I don't know that there's really any reference actually in the Lord of the Rings to those stories. It's really very much like if you've read like the Mabinogion or the Finnish Kalevala, I think that's what it's called. They're really kind of like those stories. I mean, honestly, even like Sir Thomas Malory's Le Morte d'Arthur. Not quite standalone stories, but stories where you have kind of these standalone characters that feed into this, greater mythology. But they're all connected because they're all existing in the same universe. And that's kind of what the Silmarillion is. But anyway, I thought that I would read this, and perhaps I will just read some of this with you here. So let's find this. So this is from the 24th chapter in the Silmarillion, which is of the voyage of Arandil and the War of Wrath. And essentially what happens is the elves and men in Beleriand are hard set. The sons of Feanor end up massacring a great deal of the elves. And Arandil, for pity and for love of the two kindreds of elves and men, he essentially is willing to sacrifice and risk his life to go to Valinor. Since he's a man, he's not allowed to go there. And he begs the Valar to help. And they have a discussion on whether or not he ought to be, allowed to, stay alive, essentially. And ultimately, Manwë allows for him to live, though he can never return from the Undying Lands. And that's when he is set in his ship with the Silmaril in the heavens. But they decide to, and Manwë, it specifically said Manwë is moved by pity to go and help. So I thought I might read some of this here. Let's see. Okay, so Arundel, Elwing, and 3 other mariners get in Vingalot, Arendel's ship that Círdan helps him build, and they sail to the Undying Lands with Silmaril. And Arundel and Elwing get out, and they're looking around trying to find the Valar and to beg their help. And so anyway, at the very end, Arundel can't find anyone in Tirion, and it's because they're all having a party. It's a seasonal festival that they're having, and so he can't find anyone. He's getting ready to leave, and then he hears this voice: "Hail, Arundel of mariners most renowned, the looked for that cometh at unawares, the longed for that cometh beyond hope. Hail, Arundel, bearer of light before the sun and moon, splendor of the children of earth, star in the darkness, jewel in the sunset, radiant in the morning." That voice was the voice of Eonwë, herald of Manwë, and he came from Valimar and summoned Arundel to come before the powers of Arda. And Arundel went into Valinor, into the halls of Valimar, and never again set foot upon the lands of men. Then the Valar took counsel together, and they summoned Ulmo from the deeps of the sea, and Arundel stood before their faces and delivered the errand of the 2 kindreds. Pardon, he asked, for the Noldor, and pity for their great sorrows, and mercy upon men and elves, and succor in their need, and his prayer was granted. It is told among the elves that after Arundel had departed seeking Elwing, his wife, Mandos spoke concerning his fate, and he said, "Shall mortal men step living upon the Undying Lands and yet live?" But Ulmo said, "For this he was born into the world. And say unto me, whether is he Arundel Tuor's son of the line of Hador, or the son of Idril, Turgon's daughter of the elven house of Finwë?" And Mandos answered, "Equally the Noldor who went willfully into exile may not return hither." But when all was spoken, Manwë gave judgment, and he said, "In this matter the power of doom is given to me. The peril that he ventured for love of the 2 kindreds shall not fall upon Arundel, nor shall it fall upon Elwing his wife, who entered into peril for love of him. But they shall not walk again ever among elves or men in the outer lands, and this is my decree concerning them. To Arundel and to Elwing and to their sons shall be given leave each to choose freely to which kindred their fates shall be joined, and under which kindred they shall be judged." And then Arundel and Elwing arrive together, and they are getting ready to get back in the ship and go. They're being, again, Arundel is being set in the heavens, and Elwing doesn't want to be in the ship, and eventually, there's a tower built for her, and every time Arundel approaches in Vingalot on the rising or the setting sun, she learns how to fly from birds and goes and flies to him. And so skipping forward, as this new star, this star of hope, is placed in the heavens, people in Middle-earth see it. And this is what happens. Now when first Vingalot was set to sail in the seas of heaven, it rose unlooked for, glittering and bright, and the people of Middle-earth beheld it from afar and wondered. And they took it for a sign, and called it Gil-Estil, the star of high hope. And when this new star was seen at evening, Maedhros spoke to Maglor his brother, and he said, "Surely this is a Silmaril that shines now in the west?" And Maglor answered, "If it be truly the Silmaril which we saw cast into the sea that rises again by the power of the Valar, then let us be glad, for its glory is seen now by many, and is yet secure from all evil." Then the elves looked up and despaired no longer, but Morgoth was filled with doubt. Yet it is said that Morgoth looked not for the assault that came upon him from the west, for so great was his pride become that he deemed that none would ever again come with open war against him. Moreover, he thought that he had forever estranged the Noldor from the lords of the west, and that content in their blissful realm the Valar would heed no more his kingdom in the world without. For to him that is pitiless, the deeds of pity are ever strange and beyond reckoning. And then it's told that the Valar prepare for war, and they sail across the seas and enact the War of Wrath against Morgoth, which is quite an awesome episode, very apocalyptic, really. One of the many apocalyptic events that occurs in the mythology. But it's that same thing. Arendelle is inspired by, he sees this pain and suffering and this fratricide. Not only is there a Dark Lord waging war upon men and elves, the good guys, but there's elves, the sons of Feanor, who are massacring their brothers, essentially, their fellow elves. And it's this fratricide which ultimately brings the doom of Mandos upon them when they are leaving the Undying Lands. But Arendelle sees all of this, and of all of the emotions that one might feel at something like that, it's very easy to perhaps feel this righteous anger, or this sense of judgment or hatred. But Arendelle has pity, and it leads him to, again, risk his life to go and plead their case before the gods of the West. And he is spared, and Manwë, the elder king, the king of the gods, says that it is for love and for pity that Arendelle did this, and therefore he will not bear the typical punishment for a man setting foot on the Undying Lands. And he is conversely immortalized, essentially, for his self-sacrifice. And because Arendelle had pity, Manwë has pity, which sets into motion the War of Wrath that leads to the ultimate imprisoning of Morgoth. And I think that's so poignant. And it's interesting that I can't remember who, I just heard this phrase. It's pretty quaint, but I think it has some truth to it. That history doesn't repeat itself, but history rhymes. And Tolkien does that so well in his mythology. Because, of course, all of this pity flying around, sometimes quite literally, all of this pity flying around reminds you of that quaint, know-nothing conversation that Frodo and Gandalf have in Shadows of the Past, where Frodo, in righteous anger, bemoans the fact that Bilbo didn't slay Gollum when he had the chance. It's a pity that he didn't slay Gollum when he had the chance. And Gandalf says, of course, pity, it was pity that stayed his hand. And many are the fates that will be ruled by the pity of Bilbo, essentially. Because, of course, that leads to, because Gollum is allowed to live when he deserves to die, it leads to, he is an instrument that is used by what's essentially Providence in the story to destroy the One Ring. Again, Frodo doesn't destroy the ring. Frodo fails at the very end. And it's because he isn't intended... He failed in one sense because he didn't destroy the ring. But he perhaps doesn't fail because he was never powerful. He wasn't the power to destroy the ring. It's ultimately this strange act of, the gods of Providence, essentially, that leads to, Frodo fails, but his failure is stopped by Gollum, who fails to destroy the ring, but it doesn't matter because Gollum falls by accident and destroys the ring by accident. Anyway, so pity, and it's not this, pat you on the head, I feel so bad for you, pity, but it's this compassion, this love for the other, the willing the good of the other, that drives Arendelle and Manwë and Bilbo, and many other characters, and that's how Providence is allowed to work through the Lord of the Rings. So anyway, interesting stuff. I'm glad you had a chance to stop by right when I was picking that up, because I know we had talked about that you ought to be familiar with some of those underlying stories in the mythology before we start. So at the very least, thank you for stopping by, and if I don't see you before then, I'll see you on September 22nd for the long expected party. Thanks.